what schools were about then anyway. I don't know if you want me to address that now. Or?
Yeah, well, I was just coming to that. You were saying that some of the educational system that started in Brandon was probably transplanted from Ontario. Now, what about, did the needs and the background of the people who were in Brandon have any part to play in the establishment of the school in Brandon and the way they were operated?
Well, you see, history has a curious kind of inertia. People tend to act out of some assumptions that what has occurred in the past necessarily is appropriate to the present. So I'm not sure that people that created the schools in Brandon necessarily were that thoughtful about why schools were necessary. They may well have been. I suppose it was just taken as an accepted thing that a school system with one school where kids were sent and with a curriculum and such was appropriate. Well, back in the 1840s and 50s in Ontario, such wasn't the case. The nature of public education there was quite varied. And in fact, it was only because of a fear for political stability. You'll recall that in 1837, Canada experienced two major rebellions. In the 1840s, there was a massive immigration of Irish immigrants, particularly to Canada. Through the 1840s and 50s, there was tremendous urbanization within central Canada. The result was that many of the better classes became quite frightened of the kind of cultural heterogenetic population that existed because of the appearance of large groups of young people on the street, apparently idle, because of increasing urban crime and corruption and juvenile delinquency.
In those days?
In those days. What was termed at least juvenile delinquency. And because of the feeling that if Canada was going to have a stable political system and a stable social system, then a school system was necessary to socialize people to the new country they had come to the new social and political circumstances in which they were living. So, the long and short of it is that the school system grew out of a need not so much to educate people, but to create what you might term a safe citizen.
That is going to lead to me asking you in a minute, was the curriculum very different in the 1880s to what it is now? But before we get to that, something that just came to mind is that a number of people complain nowadays that there's a real lack of discipline and respect on the part of the students in schools today. Is this much more pronounced now than it was 100 years ago? Like you were just mentioning a few minutes ago about people walking the streets and sort of juvenile delinquency back then. So is the situation today really that much different than it was in the 1880s?
Well, there are assumptions about behavior. And again, you see, our assumptions about what's appropriate for young people now are quite different. The kind of behavior that we stress in the schools, and if you just look at report cards that are sent home to parents, we tend to stress qualities of acceptance of authority, of acceptance and an ability to follow directions, of punctuality, of quietness, of orderliness, of compliance. And all of those values and attitudes and behaviors are really the values and attitudes of the workplace. We can see in a sense that schools were created to socialize a population to the kind of urban social life, urban kinds of working places in which they were increasingly coming to find themselves in the late 19th century. And so when we ask ourselves whether children are more undisciplined now than they were 100 years ago, we have to hope that kids are just as healthy now as they were 100 years ago, and that in fact they do rebel and reject a lot of the unnecessary structure that's placed on them. It would be encouraging to see schools perhaps place a little more stress on independence and creativity. Now, in the 19th century, of course, they certainly didn't. There was, if anything, a greater stress on values such as punctuality, obedience, acceptance of authority, and an overriding kind of moral earnestness, which again reflected Edgerton Ryerson, who said that if the role of the church is strong, and if Christian belief it pervades society, then the political system will be safe, the social system will be safe. Because religion, in Ryerson's view, was primarily a conservative force, and so the kind of stress on morality in the 19th century school reflected the pervasive influences of the church in the Protestant school system, and the importance